All right, to start, I have two different things to talk about. First of all, a couple of movies that I want you to be aware of. One of them is called Who We Are. It's on Netflix. If you have Netflix, the subtitle is A Chronicle of Racism in America. Jeffrey Robinson does this, and it is a magnificent film to be able to look at. He tries to talk to people of different persuasions, shall we say, and if you get a chance, watch that movie. Like I said, it's on Netflix. That if it makes you interested, he's also doing what he's called the Who We Are project, that is trying to continue that conversation and draw it out even more. Okay. Then this week I saw a movie that I didn't even know about until this week, but it's been around since the 1970s or late 1960s. Agnes Varda, everyone know her? She's a French documentary.
Say the name again.
Agnes Varda, V-A-R-D-A. And she has done some magnificent work, died a couple of years ago, but in 1960, she was a fairly young, new filmmaker, and she somehow got access to a Black Panther protest.
Oh, wow.
And so she's filming and talking to people at that space, and it's just wonderful. The name of the movie is called The Black Panthers, and you can get it on YouTube. It's a short film, probably 45 minutes long. So if you get a chance, try to watch that. Now,
There's also a film that goes along with the 1619 project.
There is. Yeah, so if you get a chance, that's on Hulu. And Hulu is one of my third subscription services. What I do is I always have Netflix, I always have Amazon Prime, and then I add a third one for a time and watch all the movies I'm going to watch on that. And then I switch to another one. And so I'm on Hulu right now and then on Movie. So I don't have Hulu right now. But if you do have Hulu, it's a good one. It's a good thing to watch.
How much does it cost?
I think Hulu is $12.99, something like that a month. Yeah, something like that. It's probably worth it. I just can't do all the third ones.
Yeah.
There's just too many of them. So my second thing is much more important and deeper. The topics that are talked about in this chapter are very sensitive topics. And I don't want to trigger anybody's whatevers. Does that make sense? I want us to be as honest and as deep as possible. But if you feel something happening in you, let us know and we'll back off. Because some of the stuff, some of the images that the author gives, some of how it's discussed, and some of the disgusting things that we have done through the ages are not simple things to talk about. So just let me know, stop us if we need to, okay? So this chapter begins with two laws passed in Virginia in the 1600s in the House of Burgesses. And most of the rest of the book is how that has affected America and specifically in the areas of race and how we're continuing to feel its effects. And the two laws are this. In 1662, they passed a law that said all children born in this country shall be held bond or free only according to the condition of mother. And in 1682, there was another law that made interracial marriage punishable by imprisonment. Both those were attempts, I believe, to control. And much of what we're going to talk about today is about fear and control. One of those two motives seems to be driving much of what this is. And neither one of those is used in a good way. And so what I want you to do is tell me what struck you, just general things, either positive or negative about this chapter. Go ahead.
Well, just at the very beginning, I was absolutely shocked that in 2019 in Virginia, they had to put the race to get their marriage license. In 2019.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Wendy, if you fill out almost any major form, like when I filled out our form to go to the annual conference, guess what? There it is. Right, it's right there on the form. And it's just become something that we ask, but it comes from more nefarious places, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sure does.
I was really glad for this couple who said, no. Why should we? Why is that important in our society today?
It's a double blind, because as a teacher and someone who had to work with records to plan state testing, we had to look at each subgroup by race. That fortunately the old No Child Left Behind was left behind, but we had to make sure that every group was being lifted. We had to make sure that any group over I think 45 had to be tested, and then if you failed with one group, your whole school failed. So part of it was trying to address the issues, but then it became, and finally the state of Arizona made it so that you could put more than one race.
I wonder if.
So it's a both or either or both and really.
Right.
Oh,
And I'm sure not all the things are nefarious in how they're used. But that story told at the beginning of the chapter definitely showed the dark side of. Deborah.
I was wondering if we had not had that with the race question and everything, if we would have needed that then in the public schools to be able to segregate them out like that.
Yeah, that occurred to me too. I mean, not something you could just fix in a couple of years. But what if we had never had those kinds of delineations?
Yeah.
Where would we be differently?
Yeah. And what would happen? Good, bad, right, wrong? Yeah. But the hard part is that if nothing else, this chapter kind of said that in most cases, without laws to speak otherwise, and sometimes with laws to speak, we go to some really dark places. Right? Some of the things that are described in here. The term that kept going through my mind the whole time was just a two-word term, Christian nation. Because we're trying to profess Christian nation, and what about most of that is happening in this chapter was good for either one of those. Right?
Yeah, it was good for profit.
It was good for profit.
I mean, that's the whole thing about the child being the property
This
connected to the mother.
it's a mother's own and a child's own.
If she's enslaved, then all of her offspring are enslaved. And as the book pointed out, that was very purposeful to make sure that not some people who were of a different race got elevated, got privileges, and so that no people would be taken from the ability to use them to create profit, to enslave them.
And I think the difficulty and maybe the rationale behind it was that, okay, so it talked about how they would grab kids on the street in Dublin or whatever, right? And they bring folks over here and they make them into indentured servants. But sooner or later, the contract let up, and so you paid them their money. And in England, where they're relatively captive in that relatively small island, they oftentimes would re-up. In America, you give them their Indian pay, what do? I'm gonna go find my own. I'm gonna go build my own. And it wasn't a sustainable system, but slavery. Not just sustainable, but a growing proposition.
Yeah.
Right?
Created the country.
Yeah, created the country, right? And we still bear a lot of the scars from that. What else came out?
The indifference to women, that really just, I mean, especially, you know, the Black women. But that you're not even human, you know what I mean? I
Yeah.
just,
Yeah, to me, that's not indifference. That's a chosen way of viewing that has very strong sense of what I want to have happen. That's not indifference. Indifference says you just ignore them.
yeah,
They're not ignoring them, they are exploiting. And yeah, we want to spend some major time today on, as the author did, on the effect on Black women in America. Because it was deep and horrendous. Thank you.
I guess I was struck at the beginning, related to the marriage issue. The movie group that I'm in, we watched Loving a number of years ago, which is about a couple that
Challenge the court.
that challenged the court.
Yeah.
And in fact, that ruling has led to some of the, they say it has led to our ability to have same-sex marriage also validated. You know, so it's a very important ruling that happened. But to look at what she cites at the beginning of this and the Loving court case side by side, I just found that really fascinating and helpful to think about.
Yeah, I'm glad you drew that parallel.
Yeah.
Yeah. The challenge.
Oh.
Go ahead, Ron.
Well, I was going to bring up the unconscious beliefs or the stereotypes of the over-sexualized male and female, and even post-slavery, the use of, even Lee Atwater, the author of the Willie Horton commercials, said you don't use N-word anymore. You talk about hard work. You talk about things that, like Reagan's welfare queen that was driving the Cadillac, or the strapping young buck that was in the supermarket with food stamps when you were paying out of your own. That whole thing just keeps playing over and over and over. And right now, after the train derailment in Ohio, the Biden administration is being attacked for giving extra, pushing for minorities when these hardworking white people can't find jobs and it just keeps repeating over and over and over again. And it's not blatant racism, it's the subtle stuff.
Yeah. And it's an ongoing assumption that underlies things, like the crack baby thing that she talked about, right? That of course that's probably true, and it's because of all those Black crack mothers.
right.
And it gives us an opportunity to make an assumption, draw a stereotype. And I love that she very strongly said it is untrue. That assumption has no basis in science.
I think that's the first time I heard that.
Yeah.
That is absolutely untrue.
Yeah. Yeah. It's because it seems like it might be true. And so it's convenient if I want to draw those lines, it's convenient to be able to do that. Right? And so we don't even question it. We just live as if it is true. And I think that's the problem with much of this stuff, is it's just passed down prejudice that we haven't thought about. Now, I think it's nice that in the last 50 years, our lifetimes, many of those old assumptions are really being brought into strong question. And I think we've been making some strong moves because of things like Loving. But I wonder how much we still don't see because we just assume it's a certain thing. And we don't ask the questions like she's asking, is it because of their race or is it because of the economic space we've left them in? Is it because of their race or is it because of the prejudice that we continue to act under? Is it, you know, and she asked that question in a number of different ways throughout this book. Throughout this chapter. Where is it that we're just assuming something? Because that's the easiest thing to do, isn't it? To just assume.
Well, the narratives get, they're out there and they just keep fitting with what we've been taught, you know? And so you just go, well, yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah.
And so we keep believing that narrative over and over.
Yeah.
And that's partly why there is such a huge push to ban books all over the country,
Sure.
because they don't want the kids to know those things. And they say, well, you're trying to make them feel really bad because they're white. No, that's not the reason. The reason is you can't fix something unless you realize that it's broken.
And my thing is this, so you're saying my little bit of teaching can destroy all of the good teaching, that your good teaching, whatever you think that is, can't withstand a little bit of bad teaching,
Right.
right? That doesn't seem like you have much trust in your own space. Right? You know, because if that kid can really think, if you help that kid to think, then they should be able to discern through whatever I give them, plus whatever you've given them, and find the right space. But if you don't think your stuff will hold up under it, maybe there's a reason.
Every time we
Like-
hear,
Can we bring up, since,
Deb,
oh,
we hear about a new banned book, I want to go out and buy it just to make sure that at least one preserved copy.
yeah, absolutely. Ron,
can we bring up American exceptionalism and the idea, so this is even in its religious connotation, this was God's experiment. And then you were not allowed to have a shadow. If we are an exceptional country, we can't have a shadow. We can, Abraham Lincoln has to be perfect. Washington and Jefferson do, and we can't honor Washington for what he did and realize that he kept slaves. And same thing with Jefferson, with the beautiful language we used, but the hypocrite that he was for using Sally Hemings as his mistress.
yeah, right. You know, and why is it that we have to have it be perfect without flaw?
Mhm.
Why is that such a need for us? Why don't we admit to the flaws?
Yeah, I think Ron's onto something. I mean, that American exceptionalism is one of the things that is just such a blinder. for
Yes.
us.
Yep. It absolutely stands there and we don't think beyond it. I'm a good American, yay, yay, rah, rah, 4th of July, stars and stripes, and so I've never questioned myself. But I wonder how much that 1600s and 1700s white slave owner told the same story just to be able to excuse the fact that he was raping his slaves in order to gain more profit. And he just said, but I'm exceptional, I'm right. And from our perspective, it's not hard to see how horrendously wrong that is. I mean, that has no place in moral society from our perspective, but did he just tell himself the same types of stories? Stories that are being repeated in some people's minds, not about raping slaves necessarily, but today how let's take away programs, let's call them entitlement programs, and take them away from people who are still suffering from the decades of prejudice. Let's take those away.
Well, and they want to take away Social Security and Medicare, and those aren't just for Blacks, those are for all of us, because we all work and pay into them.
So let's get real about, because this author spent an awful lot of time on Black women specifically. And let's talk about all of those spaces that they had to go through and see as the norm around them, even though there was nothing normal about it. Tell me, first of all, just how did you feel as you read through just the ongoing stories of ways that women were used, abused, hurt, killed? The line that struck me was this: the very notion of rape didn't apply to Black women and girls because they were considered incapable of consenting or not consenting to sex. There's not a person that doesn't know this woman has a mind to her, but to be able to look and say, oh, she can't, she doesn't have the ability to consent. How degrading, what do you have to put in your head to make that happen?
Actually, it just made me cringe. I cringed a lot reading this chapter. The 11-year-old child, it's like, oh my God.
Mhm.
The one story, I mean, you almost feel battered after a while.
Yeah, and I think that was her very purpose in this chapter, was to make you feel battered, because she's talking 400 years of battering. And if we haven't felt that, because you're right, that 11-year-olds, who were the two daughters who were sterilized when the state forced their mom to sign an X,
Yeah.
right? And give permission. What a tremendous thing to think that they should ever have that be an option. At that age, especially.
You know, kind of what's scary though, is like you're talking about, what kind of a person would do this. And yet, if you were to talk to many, not all, but many of those people, it was, I don't think in their mind, because they were so, we are American, we are the, westward expansion, etc. I don't even think they considered it immoral. You know what I mean? It was just, I guess, okay, or whatever. I don't know that a lot of them put a lot of thought into whether or not what they were spewing was actually true.
Can I give you a slightly different way of viewing it? So I look back at the 1960s, which I was too young to experience quite firsthand. I knew it was going on, but I've gone back and studied it a lot. I've read a lot. I've done a lot of the watching of different films. And I think they both knew, but said the opposite so often that they drowned out the knowing with the other side of things. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
They told the wrong story so much that became their truth, even though they knew.
Just like the stolen election.
Just like the stolen election.
You know, I don't know that I really believe that during the slave days. Like, I just can't imagine that white women were really appalled by their men running out, and they knew it. I mean, there's these mulatto children all over the place. They're not stupid. I just can't believe that there wasn't a lot of upset on many different levels when that horrific. I don't know that they slept well at night. I mean, not only were they worrying about uprisings, but also just that. I mean, the things that were written about how horrible it was, like the earth was going to open up and God was going to strike you dead if a white person and a Black person had sex together. And yet they were doing it all the time.
Right.
And they knew it. I know they knew it, and maybe some people didn't, people that didn't live around plantations where there were thousands of Black people. You know, if you lived in the North where there were fewer, or maybe there were no slaves, but I just can't imagine that they slept well at night. I think it caused a lot of indigestion.
So think of it this way, because I agree with you, Trish, it's hard for me not to think that they knew a lot. But that they tell themselves stories like many of our most wealthy here in America are telling themselves. Things like, oh, I'm powering the economic engine of America. And so what
Yeah.
I do is work, you know?
Well, and I do remember one sentence in the book that she said, that somebody had an argument that slave women were really useful because it let the young white boys have their wild oats, and it saved the purity of the white females, that somehow this was a useful thing for society. And that struck me, that sentence. It's like, oh, wow, there's a justification for you.
Yeah, and what's that say? That the purity of white boys is not as important as the purity of white girls. The purity of Black girls is not as important as the purity of white. You know, what's that really say about purity?
Have any of you read the book that was it trying to think who wrote this one. I'm getting confused between Barbara Kingsolver and Sue Monk Kidd, but Angelina and Sarah Grimke, who lived in a household in one of these plantations, and they are actual characters in both the anti-slavery and the feminist movement of that time. And there were became a couple of very powerful Presbyterian women.
Okay.
And to Trish's comments, they talk about their time of being in those homes and watching that kind of brutality and what it did to them.
Yeah.
So
And I think that the tough part about your comments, Trish, is we have to decide, how is it that we're still blinded because we don't have to see? Right? Where is it that we sit in relatively privileged white spaces, not just homes, but I mean, just the ways we can drive around the city much easier, the ways we can, you know, we're not questioning when we walk into any restaurant. How do we sit there, and because it's easy for us, we don't open our eyes to that?
Yeah, well, we're also more segregated too. You know, there's white sections and there's Black sections. I mean, those people lived together on those plantations. They had Black people in their homes. You can live your life for a long time and not have any Black people inside your house. I mean, I think that happens. It did for me for many years. Sometimes you have to make a real effort, actually. And then you're like, well, am I being out of, you know, is this out of bounds to try to, you know, to attract a Black friend? You know, you know, am I crossing some boundary? You know, try and make efforts, because we do live in a really white world, most of us.
And I think that part of how I would say that is, are you using them like a pet? Oh, look at
Yeah.
my here, right? Or are they truly a friend, and are you truly being in each other's life, and are you truly enriching to each other? And being able to see that other person as completely whole. I think at one point she asked that question. You know, being able to truly look at someone and see them as equal and not enslave them in whatever way, not add to their enslavement, or, you know, ignore their enslavement. That's an ongoing task.
Well, let me bring this up because it's the hierarchy, it's the caste system that allows the people near the bottom to say, well, at least I'm better than that. And then it becomes accepted, and we don't even question I mean, even now we don't question, we're gonna see an election in which they go interview white men in Ohio talking about, why they won't vote Democrat, but we're not talking about to African American or Hispanic or other people about their situation. We just accept that and take it for granted. And part of it is getting out of that caste system. And part of it is when we see that we can have a society when we're treated equal, that we're all better off. And we don't have to, it was just interesting that one of the ways they kept poor white men in that system was they put them in as overseers.
Yeah.
And therefore they couldn't join, because if you had poor white men joining with African Americans and other disenfranchised, the whole system would have fallen apart. And well, and I still think we're seeing that today. I mean, there still is, even with the demographic change, if enough people can believe they're white, they're part of the us, we can still break, the white, those who are considered in, we can still have the division.
At least I'm not as low as that person.
Yes, I mean, but like my ancestors were Quaker and German. They were on the outside, and then they became on the inside. And the Italians and the Irish that were felt separated, and then when they joined the us, they worked against those who were out. So it just seems like a repeating pattern until we could break that cycle.
And the difficulty is we have two big groups that are really hard. It's really hard for them to integrate in. One of them is the American Black, right?
Yes.
We've done so many years of keeping them apart that it's hard. But we've done the very same thing to all Native Americans, right? And we've essentially drawn even though they may live outside the lines of the reservation, they can't get outside of the lines of reservation that we continue to see them as. And we're trying to do the same thing, I think, with Hispanics with the whole border thing, but at least Hispanics can become white in a very real way. I love that they don't want to these days, that they are fighting that designation to have to fit in. So, but Blacks have tried to do that too. There's a movie that came out this last year called, it just slipped out of my head. Passing. Have you seen that? It is about a woman of African American descent, but who also is white enough that she is trying to pass as white, and she meets one of her old friends who is obviously more Black looking than what she is, and deals with what do you do now. So it's really interesting documentary. Not documentary, it's a story, but it's an interesting story.
When I was reading this, I sat back and I kind of wondered how hard it was for the author to, as a Black African American woman, to not only research these stories, but then to sit down and write them and tell them. In such a candid way. I mean, I think she was candid. I don't think she was over the top or anything like that. This is what happened. That must have been incredibly difficult.
Must have been. I agree with you.
And yet, don't you think this whole project has been a liberation also, when you can get out, when you tell your side of the story, when you can offer truth, I think it's probably both of those things.
Yeah. I was struck in here how, as she moved through the decades and told all the stories of how women had been so terribly mistreated and they were kept under captivity in a very real way, even after slavery ended. I love the part where she starts talking about the folks that are beginning to do that unenslavement. And I liked that part a lot as she's trying to say, here's where Black women are finding their voice. And that's I think that's one of the things we have to be very aware of. How are we helping those folks have opportunities? So can I do a little commercial? This morning I sat
Did
in,
we stop you?
no. This morning I sat in a meeting. I'm on the board of an organization called JobPath. And JobPath does this. JobPath provides funds and support and ways to go from where you're at to where you can go. And the statistics is something like that. If this is your salary ahead of time, our average is about $50,000 more than what you were making before you did this. And we do a lot of partnering, for example, with Pima County College, and get people into programs, aviation programs and nursing programs, and all kinds of different ways that people emerge at a much better space. And the majority of our folks are women. Many are of color, to try to help them to have the ability to live life without some of the challenges that their past has given to them. So if you're ever looking for a way to really help, JobPath would love any donation you give. That's the end of the commercial. and just know that there's other programs like that, but that's a good way to be able to do that. Because what you don't want to do is just throw money at something. You want to throw money at empowerment type of programs that allow folks to move beyond. I watched a movie this week called Black Girl. It was made in the late 1980s by Ossie Davis. Do you know Ossie Davis? A wonderful actor, but his filmmaking as a director, I think, was even more powerful. And this is one of his films, and it's horrendous in some ways because it shows a dysfunctional Black family where Madea, the grandmother and mom are all living in the same house with a bunch of kids. Specifically 3 girls, and mom has basically given up on all 3 of her girls, including the youngest one, who has a different father than the 2 older ones. And so what she started doing is adopting other kids, and she's very clearly saying they're more capable than what you guys are, right? And so the youngest one is continually hearing this, you're not good enough. But the star of what mom had done, played by Leslie Uggams, she's off at college and about to finish college. She comes back for a visit and just horribly treated, but she speaks well enough in the youngest sister's ear that younger sister goes with her to be able to see, can I have a better life than what I have here? And I think that's part of what we have to do, is speak in such a way that people can hear something different than what they're hearing on a regular basis from not just their communities, but the hard part right now is if you're in a poor situation in America, a poverty-laden situation, a violent situation, things like gangs, things like drugs, things like violence, that seems like it might get you out of it. Crime seems like a possibility. And how do we give other options? How do we help people discover those other options? Because sometimes the schools in those areas have been some of our worst funded schools, right? That's not giving them better options. That's not helping them advance. And I think we have to figure out some things like that. Instead, we pass things like the rich, like right now, the tax credit thing. Everyone knows how that tax credit works. You can give a certain amount of money. Everybody in America, everybody in Arizona who pays taxes can give a certain amount of money to a school district, which most people want to give it to their school district. And not that Catalina Foothills, for example, doesn't need money, because every school district in America needs it, but do not give your tax credit to Catalina Foothills. Why? They have plenty of money already. Go give it to Sunnyside. Right? Go give it to Amphi.
Yes, Amphi Middle School and Amphi High School.
That's right. Give it somewhere where the need is even greater than wherever you live. Okay, but what we continue to give to ourselves, essentially, instead of giving, beyond us.
One of the substance abuse counselors for teenagers in a residential facility, and I had a lot of probation kids. I will never forget this one, he was from Imperial Valley. And we were talking one day, and he's like, Deborah, I'm just doing time here. Because when I get out of here, I'm gonna go back to doing what I was doing. He was actually busted for dealing. And he said, because as a dealer, I can support my mom and my dad, I can take care of things, and they have nice things, and I have nice things. But if I go back and try to live this life of, that you're talking about, I'll be taking the box.
Yeah.
So what do I do here?
Yeah,
What-
yeah.
And I just kind of sat there because I'm like, I
Yeah.
don't have a good answer for that.
And we'll get more into these in the chapters on economics, because the economics of how we continue to enslave our huge impediments. And we have to figure out how to do that, and especially for black women. He again and again said, here's another roadblock, here's another obstacle, here's another way. The whole sterilization system, section just blew me away. Like, okay, let's not let you have kids. Let's take that part of you away. Let's complain because you're, from our point of view, overly sexualized. Let's complain because you've stolen the role of head of the family from the father. All kinds of different ways to say, whatever your situation, I don't like it, and I'm just gonna say that it's horrible for you, instead of trying to do something to fix
It's
it.
your fault.
Yeah, it's your fault, not how do I help support you in that space. But that's how we've done it again and again, isn't it? This chapter sheet very clearly lines out all these ways that we have stood, we meaning mainstream America, including many of our laws, and much of the way we practice has stood against Black women. How do we begin changing that?
I'd like to bring up the idea of national service.
Yeah.
In like a year of not just in the military, but working around the country, and that would bring groups that have been separated together, and then you can begin to see the humanity. And I'll bring up, since I worked at Pima College in evening teaching a class, those classes were more integrated. Things like Job Path bring in students for degree programs, and those tend to be more integrated too. And then you can see just like we've done at St. Francis, when we see the face of somebody who's gay or LGBTQ or trans, we don't see them, we see them and their struggle, and we see them as a person, not as the other.
And that's the hard part. Stereotypes come easy, don't they, Ron?
Yeah, yes.
But choosing to step towards and talk in a true relationship with another person is essential. But we have to work at it.
I was just thinking, even as a person of the LGBTQ community and being out, in the fight kind of thing, reading this chapter was just appalling, because I never once, I experienced some violence and some assault and that kind of thing, but nothing so dehumanizing as what was going on to these Black women. It just blew my mind to be able to look at someone and say, who you're having a conversation with and say, but you're not intelligent enough or whatever it is to give consent.
Yeah.
You know, what you want, you know, doesn't matter. I had tremendous respect. I know we're not supposed to get into violence, but the woman who took the club and beat the guy
Yeah,
who
yeah.
kept coming at her, I mean,
Yeah.
good for you.
And I hope she went to her death proud of her
Yeah.
actions.
Because it
Right,
cost
and-
her everything.
That's right, and I don't wanna say, that I condone death, because I don't want, but
Yeah.
she did the right thing.
Yeah.
She did the right thing. And yet, she was tried by our system and found guilty.
Well, it's because she was tried by a jury of white men.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But that's been too often the story, hasn't it? That white men are going to make the decisions for you poor black folks. And especially for you poor black woman.
But we still have that situation today.
We do.
You know, we have a Congress full of mostly white, old, you know, too far removed from the general public to really understand what's going on. And they're making decisions for women.
Yeah.
And the poor
Yeah,
and the elderly,
yeah,
and they don't live there anymore.
right.
If they ever did. For me, just because I haven't read chapter 2 yet, okay, I'm a little behind and stuff, but
I've heard you're a bigot. Behind.
okay, I'm gonna go to chapter 1. But I spent a lot of my life living in Virginia, where they're still fighting the Civil War. And that was really hard for me because I didn't grow up that way. I didn't grow up treating, you know, you different because you're black, or you different because you're Jewish, or you different because, I didn't grow up that way. My mom didn't raise me that way. She raised me to be, everybody is the same, you know? I swear to God, if we didn't have skin, we'd find something else to be prejudiced about.
We have.
Yeah, pretty much. I don't know if y'all remember Oprah 1,000 years ago had a program where when people came in, people with blue eyes were given like a handkerchief or something to wear, and they were seated on the left side of the studio. People with brown eyes were brought in and they were seated on the other side of the studio. The first 30 minutes were them, she had some expert there who had done some big college study on the fact that people with blue eyes were stupid and couldn't be taught anything. What was interesting is most people of color have brown eyes. So there were a lot of people of color and people with dark eyes and stuff on the other side. Now my eyes are green. And I was dating a girl at the time whose eyes were just as brown as they could get without being black. And we're sitting watching this program. And as this first half hour is going on, I'm realizing this is just, it's a test. And she's buying into it and she's believing all this. And she's saying, oh my God, this is true. And I said, you're saying I'm stupid. Okay, when you do that, you're saying I'm stupid because my eyes are not brown. And they cut to commercial, they come back for the last half, and there were still a number of people that were sitting on the brown-eyed side of the studio that you could not convince them that it was all a joke.
Yeah.
This was all a test.
Yeah.
And it took me weeks to convince her that, you know, it was all, you know, just a big study.
Yeah.
What was life experience with you that made her wonder?
Shut up. He would have been sitting on the light outside of the studio as well. Just remember that. I think that's a lot of the issue that we have when we start looking at race and cultural differences.
Yeah.
Is we have spent so much time being told that this is the truth.
Yeah, and repeating that line, that's important. It's not that you hear it, It's that you repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, and you don't really investigate whether it's true.
Exactly, and that's where we are today, and that's why some of the same things that were happening then are happening now.
Yeah,
You know, we still basically have a large portion of our society that are still enslaved. Not just blacks, not just Native Americans, but you've got, Hispanics. Anybody who comes from any place else other than the United States of America, especially the South. Jewish people are still hugely, beat upon on a regular basis. If, I'm a liberal white Democrat northerner, I don't fit in the South. And I'm probably gonna get, beaten up if I open my mouth and, say anything. Ever. But I mean, it's stuff that perpetuates over and over and over and over again, because the people with the smallest minds have the biggest mouths.
I will say though, you talk to a lot of people who have been in the different areas, they would say that at least the honesty of the prejudice of the South is easier than sometimes the hidden prejudice of the North.
Oh, yeah.
And so we have to make sure that we're not sitting in that space, acting like we're the right side, but not truly giving full humanity to the people we deal with, or expecting that I get to go in front, even though. And there's a lot of that's easy to not even see, because you don't have to see it as a white person. To see it, you've got to listen to the person of color around you.
We had a conversation with Shermaine and Alana at the church that we were at before, one time after church, and we were talking specifically about racism. There was about 5 or 6 of us in there in the sanctuary, just Shermaine and Alana were black. And they talked about, I mean, it was a hard conversation to sit there and have, because they were black and the congregation was pretty much white. And they were talking about how when white people say things like, well, I don't see color, that how offensive that is. And when you said, well, I don't see color, and they go, it's like it just denigrates their whole experience.
Yeah.
Because even if you don't see color, I mean, really, if you try to live that in your life, you're still battling stuff that you may not even know about.
Sure.
And it was just interesting to me, because that's what, good white people say now, I don't see color.
Right. You do that to assuage our guilt, instead of stepping into the fact that the color has helped form them, that other person, the gender that they are, that the sexuality that they are, that all that is important to that person's identity. And if what we do is say, you have no choice in it, you're just what I say you are, how much better are we than the slave owner that raped one of his slaves? How much better are we?
So I'm going to bring up, and my memory could be bad, but I believe it happened in the 60s. So the original Blue Eye, Brown Eye was done in a white classroom, and I believe it appeared in Reader's Digest.
Yes.
And the whole idea was to get a white class to understand stereotypes. And the problem with, you've been a teacher, it takes a lot of work to pull that off, and a lot of things can go wrong. And that's one of the problems, because when things go wrong, then that gets lumped into critical race theory. You're trying to make people feel guilty, and look how bad this is. So that's the challenge. How do we do this without messing up?
And the reason why, Ron, and we're out of time, so I'm just going to throw this as a teaser for weeks to come. We have to deal with 2 different very strong things that we like to not admit that we like. Okay, we have to deal with fear that we don't admit to. There's a lot of fear that drives many of these types of decisions. But the other thing that's really important is we have to deal with control issues. And the reason why, for example, on the Oprah show, some people didn't want to let go of it because they liked being told that they were whatever this narrative was,
Yeah.
right? And we all like being lifted up in that way. But so does the person who is not being lifted up. And so as you're being lifted up at the expense of, that's the difficult part. And so we'll delve into all that much more as we go along. There's a couple of chapters left before we solve all of these. All right, my friends, thank you for the time. Have a good week.
And Jim, is the remote on top of the computer for the Zoom?
What do you mean the remote for this, for in here?
Yes, so when I come in Friday, will it be there?
There's not a remote for the TV.
Okay, so you have to turn it on manually?
Yeah, there's a,
Okay.
down on the far right-hand side, there's a button that you push.
All right, thanks.
It's not a button that you see, it's just an electronic button. Okay?
All right, thanks.